Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today I've got a guest with me whom is very well known and very well respected. And in my mind, I have a great amount of appreciation for the things that she brings to the table. All things microbiome, herbs, all the wisdom that she shares with people is just truly incredible. And it was a true honor to have her with us today. Her name is Dr. Maya Shetreat. She's a neurologist, herbalist, hermit farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure, Healthy Food, Healthy Gut, Happy Child, which has been translated into 10 languages. She's been featured in the New York Times, The Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, The Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches terrain medicine, earth-based programs for transformational healing, and she works and studies with indigenous cultures, communities, and healers in Ecuador. And she considers herself a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacred. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Maya. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Now, here's the thing. We were talking about this a little bit on the Healthy Skin show, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to really dive a little bit deeper into the immune system and when it goes haywire and crazy, because I kind of feel like that's a good way to describe what's happening when you end up with eczema or psoriasis, because a lot of people just think they have this issue at the level of the skin, but they don't realize that there's things happening underneath the surface. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Peter Leo, who's also on the same event, talked a lot about how inflammation internally can drive some of these processes. So could you just talk to us a little bit? I think a great place to start would be about what is the role of this sort of haywire immune system and how it can potentially drive or trigger something like eczema or psoriasis.
Sure. I think it's not surprising that people think it's just a topical issue or just skin deep, especially because most dermatologists actually treat these conditions with topical treatments like, steroid cream or other kinds of creams, when really everything's happening at a much deeper level. And the skin is just an expression of things that are happening deeper in the body. And a lot of times where it all starts is actually the gut, the digestive tract, and that can be what people are eating. It can be different kinds of microorganisms that are thriving in the gut that maybe shouldn't be, that can be disruptive in some way. It can be a gut lining, which normally should be very kind of sealed shut and only letting certain things in. And instead, sometimes it can be a little leaky or overly permeable and letting in things that shouldn't be, that irritate the immune system. But whatever it is, what we need to know is that the gut, the digestive tract, is filled with immune cells. There's tonsils, there's a spleen, there's lymph nodes, there's all kinds of immune cells that really live along the digestive tract. And what they do is all they're doing is really trying to meet and greet all the different compounds and microorganisms that come through. And then they kind of check them out and they're like, okay, you're cool. And, everything's okay. But if the immune system, let's say, hasn't been exposed to lots of different over someone's life. Let's say it hasn't been exposed to lots of different organisms. They've been living like a very, very super clean life in certain ways, which we think of as a good thing. But the immune system doesn't actually like that as much, right? Because it doesn't get to meet and greet as many compounds and microorganisms. The immune system starts to think that things are enemies that are actually not enemies. And what happens is it starts to activate. Okay, and it activates for something like milk, or it activates for some organism that's a totally normal organism, and it starts to think, whoa, this might be an enemy, and then it starts to kind of mobilize the troops in a way that it actually doesn't have to, right? Like milk's not an enemy. It's really not an enemy unless the immune system is inappropriately kind of attacking it. So when these kinds of things happen, this is when the immune system kind of goes haywire, as you say it, and it starts to mobilize this sort of fighting response that causes inflammation in different parts of the body, including the skin.
Well, so one thing I want to touch on that you mentioned was that being overly clean is not necessarily a good thing. And we talked a lot about that on the podcast, but I think just for the purposes of this, could you just quickly touch on the fact that to some degree, we really do need that stimulation of our immune system as opposed to being in this completely sterile environment?
Right. Well, it's because our immune system is actually a social system. It's an information processing system, and it's always learning, starting from literally the first second that we're born. We're learning. I mean, if you think back to developmental stages of babies, very early on, babies are crawling and putting everything in their mouths. And if we think about crawling on the ground, right, like the dirt and outside in the grass or wherever, and putting things in their mouths, that's to teach our immune systems from literally the very beginning to encounter lots of different things and be okay with it. So really, like we went through this period of time. Actually, when we first discovered germs and Louis Pasteur and this whole period of time where we thought any germ was a bad thing, right? And it turns out that now we know that, there is a microbiome, right? We have 3 to 5 pounds of, invisible to the naked eye microorganisms that live on our skin, in our gut, in and on our body, 3 to 5 pounds. So we really need them because they actually help our immune system to be balanced and healthy. But back then, we didn't know that. And we thought everything should be sterile. Everything should be totally clean, and that we should avoid, any contact with microorganisms. And at that time, we even thought things like yogurt or sourdough bread were bad things because they were supposed to be like contaminated with bacteria. When actually now we know that fermented foods, like those kinds of foods, actually are incredibly important for the health of our microbiome, as is getting in the dirt. So we're sort of on the other end of the pendulum right now. And really, our immune systems need those contacts and those experiences to be healthy and resilient and not to react in the wrong way. For example, when we encounter foods or other things, because that's what's causing, all these food allergies, for example, partly is that the immune system needs lots of contact with different things, kind of getting dirty, right?
So to speak. Well, and when we go into that place where we say, okay, now the immune system is going haywire, in air quotes, there's a thing called cytokines, and they're very much tied to inflammation. And I think this is one of the biggest pieces that I feel like is missing in this whole realm, is that people think that you get eczema or you get psoriasis and it's started on the skin. And certainly it's possible to have like an abrasion, and I'm not exactly sure what the connections are, but I have read some research that you could have a injury to an area and then develop rashes later on in that particular area and whatnot. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff that I found in my clinical practice is driven from internal things. So if that's the case, if we've got to look deeper, can you talk to us about what cytokines are and how do they play a role in that inflammation that could be potentially triggering the issue under the surface?
So cytokines are the way that immune cells communicate with each other, largely. Okay, so, the way neurons communicate with each other is through neurotransmitters, right? Like serotonin or dopamine, norepinephrine, things that like a lot of people have heard of. Immune cells communicate with each other through cytokines. So it's sort of the way they send messages to each other through these little chemical compounds. And, so that's not all cytokines do, but that is like a big primary way that immune cells in one part of the body communicate with immune cells in another part of the body. Let's say immune cells in the gut, where there's a huge immune system, can communicate with immune cells in the skin or in the lungs or in the brain, right? So where you see the symptoms is not always where the problem has started. And that's why I always say to begin with the gut, because we have a huge immune system in the gut. And that's like a lot of what stimulates the immune system, because it's constantly, seeing all the things that are coming in, right, that you're eating. So cytokines basically can be either pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory, but very often in the case of eczema or psoriasis or a number of other issues, asthma, for example, or even the allergic response, the cytokines are inflammatory cytokines. And so something comes in, the immune system's like, I don't like these immune cells that spot something. And then they start releasing cytokines, and it sends like, to all the other immune cells that then start to activate. And when they activate, they they start to release their own cytokines that can affect, let's say, the skin, right? That's where their local area that they're affecting is. And so that's how cytokines can have an effect from wherever they are.
So it doesn't really matter then, as you're saying, essentially, if in the gut they encounter something that is alarming to them, they're essentially warning other cytokines, hey, be on the lookout. Hey, we have a problem. And then they're releasing their chemical. And then it's almost like this, it's like it's a cascade, so to speak, but it's also this like brewing storm in the body that can be very difficult to stop, I would imagine, because there's not a switch you just flip.
Exactly. And what someone actually, Dr. Robert Navio, has described this as the cell danger response. So he's a metabolic researcher at UC San Diego, and he's looked at this through this lens of cell danger as being the cause of almost every chronic illness. But certainly it's related to all of these issues where you have an activated system, right, that thinks that there's danger going on. And rather than going back into chill mode, right, into kind of this like nice, regenerative, happy, resilient place, it kind of, whatever system it is, it could be the nervous system, it can be the immune system, it's in active mode, it's in alerted mode. And exactly as you're saying, it's saying, hey, we're on alert. There could be danger here. And what that does is it creates this, kind of this situation it's a stress situation all the time. And how that can look is, an immune system that's a little overactive, always kind of like on the lookout or always thinking that there's a problem, releasing these inflammatory cytokines that activate all different parts of the body. And that's why some people may have just eczema or psoriasis, but some people may have more, issues, not just in their skin, but also, let's say, breathing, they might also have asthma, or they might also get migraines, or they might, right? Because it's affecting all different parts of the body. Sometimes it might just affect one part. Sometimes it might affect many parts.
Mm. And with your line of research and work in the herbal world, do you find that, and this is where I love the fact that you can kind of bridge the old wisdom with the current research that we have, do you feel like there's a role that herbs and plants can play in helping us start to say, hey, cells, calm it down. You don't need to be so nuts?
Well, I think that herbs are actually probably the best way to do that, because in conventional medicine, we only have, we really have steroids, right? And sometimes, other immune medicines that are about shutting down the immune system. And there's a couple problems with shutting down the immune system. One is that then you're more vulnerable to infections. That's number one, right? Because the immune system is actually, at least in part, there to protect you from infections. So anytime you're using something that suppresses the immune system, whether orally or topically, you're opening yourself up to possibly more infections. It affects the microbiome, right? Those bacteria and other organisms that live in and on your body that also help regulate your immune system. So that's another thing. And then the third thing is that when you stop whatever treatment that is, you can have a rebound where the immune system gets super active and actually kind of goes in the other direction from what you were trying to do, right? You're trying to suppress it, and then you just want it to kind of come back and be like, okay, I'm good now. but actually sometimes it'll actually go in the opposite direction and you'll have another spike in inflammation and sometimes symptoms. So in herbal medicine, the beautiful thing is that very often the kinds of herbs that we use help balance, right? Mm-hmm. Herbal medicine is about balancing, and these are very, right, it's not a drug, it's a plant, and a plant is filled with thousands of different compounds. It's like its own universe, and plants have evolved with our bodies since the beginning of time, right? So we have these two complex systems that have evolved together, working together to create balance and resilience. So I always go to plants before I go to pharmaceuticals, unless, literally everything's on fire and we have to just do something very aggressive. So what I love, for example, is something like reishi mushroom, where reishi mushroom actually both reduces, it calms down the reactive allergic part of the immune system, while at the same time it strengthens the non-specific immune system, which is just generally protective. So you're getting, at the same time that you're kind of calming down that overactive reactive part, you're also getting strengthened in the non-specific arm of the immune system. So you're not necessarily so likely to get an infection, as you would be, let's say, with steroids. It's very balancing and it's very strengthening.
That is super interesting. And I've read some interesting case studies about reishi, and there was one case study where I know I don't believe they had psoriasis. I don't remember what type of it was an autoimmune skin condition, and they were stating that the person had actually washed in a solution that had reishi in it, and they noticed a real reduction in the lesions on the skin, and the researchers were really taken back at the results. And so I think reishi is going to be a very interesting thing to be studied over the next few years in connection to eczema and psoriasis. And with your experience with that, is that something, because now there's all these mushroom products out there. There's tinctures, there's teas, there's coffees.
Yeah.
There's pill. Do you have any recommendation of somebody who's like, ooh, it's a mushroom? What do you suggest as far as a good way if you're just kind of entering into that realm of potentially trying it out for yourself?
Yeah. Well, first things first, if someone's allergic to mushrooms, then probably reishi is not going to be a great choice. But for the rest of everybody who are mostly not allergic to mushrooms, I think reishi's not, of most of the mushrooms, reishi is probably the most medicinal, or one of the most medicinal, versus edible, tasty mushrooms in general. Now we do have these products where reishi's been integrated, but as opposed to, let's say, maitake or shiitake mushrooms, for example, that are delicious, and I love all kinds like lion's mane and oyster mushrooms. Go to your farmer's market, have all those delicious mushrooms, and all of them have medicinal properties, by the way. But reishi is definitely not the one you're gonna saute and pop in your mouth. It's bitter, but the fact that it's in coffee or hot chocolate or things like that, I think it's fine. I think you always want to make sure you're getting something that's good quality. But, and I think tinctures are great if you just want to kind of get it done. A tincture is really the traditional way, that most people have consumed reishi as a medicine. So I think any of those things are fine. And, I'm very loose with the way I start most botanicals. There are a few that you have to be very, very careful with. But something like, reishi mushroom, for example, you just can take half a dropper of a tincture, or even a few drops if you want to start very cautiously, and put it in some water and, throw it back and see how you feel. As long as you feel fine, you can kind of increase it slowly. And I think that it's funny because most of us are not very cautious about popping Tylenol or ibuprofen or whatever, but we're like, oh my God, a mushroom. You know what I mean? And I'm not talking about like going outside to the woods and just picking a random mushroom, which I think you should be cautious about. But I mean, I'm talking about these like regulated herbal products. Like these are not, these are usually much, much safer than anything else you're going to get over the counter, to be
Yeah.
honest with you.
Very true. What would be another interesting botanical option that for people who have this primary complaint of a skin issue that comes to mind?
Well, I love calendula. So calendula is kind of like I think it's like a marigold family, and they're beautiful gold flowers. I grow them in my garden, and you just plant them every year. And actually, like the flowers themselves are incredibly healing for the skin and soothing. So if you look, online at almost any herbal skin blend, it will almost always have calendula flowers as part of the combination. So, what you can do is literally like get calendula flowers. You can even buy dried calendula flowers. You don't have to actually grow them, but you can get them at a lot of different kinds of herbal stores online or in person. And then, you just put them in oil. And
That's it.
like it could be like olive oil, it could be coconut
Yeah.
oil. I mean, you have any number of choices of oil. Some people blend them, but literally you let them sit there, 2 to 3 weeks, and then strain them, and you literally can rub that oil on any skin issues.
Wow. So you could
Yeah, it's that
just
simple.
so you're infusing the oil with the phytonutrients and phytochemicals from the plant, and then you could apply that.
Yes.
And for someone if they have an allergy, is it to daisies? Is there an allergy with that particular family?
Yeah, I mean, I think you always have to be like for me, I think a lot of people do fine, with a calendula oil, even if they
Okay.
have certain kinds of allergies. But what I would say is you always want to, no matter what you're doing, especially if you have allergic skin, you always want to take, before you put on something topically, just sample it on, a spot on your skin that's okay, just put a little dab on it and wait 24 hours because, no matter what, if your skin is very sensitive, you could have, it's possible you can react to something and you wouldn't know it. But I will say it's a lot less likely that you're going to react to something really simple, botanical, versus a lot of the creams that people are using are filled with different kinds of preservatives and other things. And you may think, oh, this cream isn't working. I feel worse. I had recently had a friend actually who was having a rash. She didn't know why. She was so itchy and was breaking out. And it turned out the cream she was given by her dermatologist had propylene glycol in it. And the propylene glycol, which is widespread in lots of different creams, it turns out that's what she was allergic to.
Oh,
And
wow.
when she eliminated, that's how she figured it out, that she had other things that had propylene glycol in it in her life. Once she realized it was in the cream and then she took it out of her life, her skin got completely better and she was 100% fine.
Wow. Huh, interesting. How about St. John's wort, but as an oil? Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something that can be healing to skin. Absolutely. I think, St. John's wort as a skin, as a topical is definitely something that can be quite healing and also sometimes helpful for pain too.
Interesting.
I think you want to be careful with topicals if you have open wounds.
Okay.
That's the one thing I would say, not specifically necessarily just for St. John's wort, but in general, using it, you always want to just have a little guidance if you actually have like excoriated spots where there's actually, like weeping or open areas where the skin's really broken versus just irritation. It's better to have a little guidance with what you want to use in those areas.
Absolutely. And I don't think, I think in the skin realm, it gets easy to say, like, I'm so fed up with doctors, I don't want to deal with them anymore. But there's a time and a place for having that expertise. And my personal feeling is that, that's beyond my scope of practice. I'm allowed to help support around food and whatnot. But you don't know what you don't know. And a doctor, that can be where they can really shine and help guide you if, God forbid, you do have something that's pretty serious or you suspect that it could be an infection. It's better to get that checked sooner rather than later. So, any other herbs, like I know for a lot of people, there's a lot of stress that's associated with chronic skin issues, a lot of overwhelm, depression, frustration, anxiety. I mean, there is a really serious, heavy emotional component to it. Is there anything that someone could try or, I don't know, reach for potentially or check out if they've been they're getting really frustrated and they're just aren't, they're losing that sense of joy and hope and they just need some support in that realm?
Definitely. I mean, I think, there's a great connection or a very strong connection between skin inflammation, gut inflammation, and mood, and anxiety, that we know that all three of those things are connected. One thing that I love actually for wound healing, which is also calming and happens to be a cognitive enhancer too, which is like always nice to feel like your memory is going to be a little bit better, is Gotu kola, which is a Ayurvedic herb, and it's actually incredible for wound healing. So I've used it actually for open wounds, and I've also used it for healing any kinds of wounds or skin conditions, and it's well studied for that. You can take it orally, and you can use it topically, and that actually it does also have a calming effect, so which is really nice. But some other just calming nervines that are botanical can be something as simple as chamomile. So having a nice strong cup of chamomile tea, and when I say a strong cup, if you're using chamomile medicinally and not just for like a little flavor, I would say you want to use as many as 4 to 8 bags of chamomile in your mug.
That's a lot of chamomile.
Yeah. So
Okay.
let's say you're doing it, if you're just doing it for like a nice cup of tea, it's not that you're not going to get some benefit, but if you really want the full medicinal impact, let's say you start with like 3 or 4 bags, tea bags, that's going to be both calming. It's going to be actually healing to your gut as well, because it's very lightly bitter. That bitterness is actually very important for gut health, and it actually can also help skin health. So chamomile is one that's gentle, and it's in like a lot of people's cabinets. Another one that I like a lot is passion flower. Passion flower has been actually compared in studies to certain pharmaceutical benzodiazepines, and benzodiazepines are like, in the family of like Valium, right? Like it certainly doesn't have those particular qualities, but when it's been compared to similar pharmaceuticals, it's as effective, but it doesn't impair your function, and it's not addictive. So, it's a simple, easy, and safe way to help just calm yourself down a little bit if you are really stressing out. Another herb I really, really like is lemon balm. And that is something you can drink as a tea as well as using in tincture form. Lemon balm is called the gladdening herb. So it lifts your mood.
Oh, wow.
And it's calming at the same time. So I think like if someone is feeling really discouraged, and like these days a lot of us go through some discouraging feelings at various times, lemon balm is something that is also very accessible, and it has that effect of sort of enhancing happiness or joy.
And are any of these that you've mentioned, like chamomile, passion flower, lemon balm, are any of them, would they be a good choice if, say, you're having a hard time at night winding down, or you feel like you get incredibly itchy at night and you just need something to help you relax in a sense, as opposed to taking Benadryl?
Yeah, absolutely. I think passion flower in particular is really good for nighttime. And another thing people can do also, I think, is, melatonin for falling asleep instead of Benadryl, if they want to give themselves a break from the Benadryl train.
Yeah, and that can be a tricky thing because it's like you need to go to sleep, you need to stop itching, and you need to go to sleep, but you don't want to keep taking those medications long term. There can be some side effects to them, and there are some really interesting warnings when you start looking at those medications. And I think that's sort of the lesson here too, as you were sharing. There are potential issues that can result in some of the medications, and yes, there's always side effects with even. I mean, I always say we have to respect herbs and botanicals as much as we respect medications. We can't assume that you could never have a reaction to them. You could never be allergic to them because
Absolutely.
that is always possible. But I love the fact that we can have some other things that you shared that aren't addictive, that may have a really great effect on the body and help you wind down and calm down, and especially because stress is such a big component to this and drives inflammation and drives a lot of these issues without necessarily feeling like you're stuck. You've got to take this pill or this shot or whatever it is every single day, or else you're going to end up in trouble. So, well, I just want to thank you so much. This has been really helpful, and I know that it's going to help every single person who's taking a real serious look at their health and saying, now's the time to start reevaluating this, because I think, and I don't know if you agree, and I'll just kind of leave this as an opportunity for you just to share your thoughts, but I kind of believe that, especially from my own journey, that skin issues or any health issues really are an opportunity to start looking deeper and to saying, hey, my body's trying to tell me something. Maybe it's time that I put aside all the busyness and the craziness of life and start paying attention to me, because something needs my attention. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it really is an opportunity. The body only can communicate to us through symptoms, right? I mean, that's how the body says, I'm out of balance and I need attention. So it's sort of an opportunity when we're in these situations to reevaluate and look at parts of our lives, which it could be taking more time for ourselves, getting better sleep, changing something really stressful, changing diet, getting outside more, getting more sunshine. I mean, there's numerous possibilities. And I think it's all about experimenting with that and kind of like, looking at yourself and your life with new eyes. And then you can find that you might make a change or a few changes and everything else transforms. It might not just be your skin. It might be many other things too.
I agree. And actually, that feeds right into, you've got some really great content and information to share with everybody that can help them on that level of tuning in, of calming down, of really connecting deeper. And we'll put a link to that at your Earth Medicine Transformation Bundle. And I'm sure that everyone will really appreciate that. And we'll put links to your website and your book. And I know we've got some other things on here. And I just want to make sure that everyone can connect with you and all of the great things that you're doing. So thank you so, so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.